Good morning. Good morning, Hemshech Ayin Beis. Continuing the review, conclusion. We are on page 1447. Yeah. Okay. For the record, tonight or today, I'm submitting my fourth part for the essay that I'm writing, which is in writing, summing up much of what we discuss, the context of the conclusion of Ayin Beis. So this will be the fourth part. First, I thought it would be 7 parts. Now maybe 8 parts, even 9 parts. I'm not sure. Let's put it this way. It's expanding as it goes. So, also I mentioned I gave last night a shir to the Halater Zal, the Bachrim, the highest shir of the older Bachrim in the Halater, on why is Mashiach not come yet. So I sent it to Yitzchak, 2 versions to decide which one to post. They were both done by listeners, so got to find the clearest one. But we'll post it as well on our site. So I talk a lot about topics we addressed a few days ago about why Mashiach hasn't come and what's going on. What did the Rebbe mean? So I think that could be very helpful. It ended up being pretty long shir, like an hour. It started 9:30 till around an hour and a half, and then I stayed with the Bachrim. I bring till 3:30 in the morning. So here you go, and now I'm here. Give you a little taste of my schedule. Okay, but back to Ayin Beis. So, where are we? We're learning about a very thorough, pretty comprehensive picture of different stages, both in history and events, major watershed moments that we are all familiar with, and what that means in Ruchnius. So we say Matan Torah. We all understand it's a big event. It's at a watershed moment. But what exactly happened? So Gili Elikus. But what level Gili Elikus? And how do you compare it to Beis Hamikdash? How do you compare it to Moshe's times? Well, it was Moshe's time, Matan Torah, obviously. But Yeshua and Yecheskel and Golus in general. And all this is coming in context of what he began discussing, how neshamas, when they come down below, have to contend with quite a few challenges. First of all, the tzimtzumim, all the concealments, simply by the journey of a neshama from the highest levels downward, even without anything else. Then when you add into the equation human behavior and transgressions like chet tzadas and chet egel, that just adds to the concealments. And when you add Golus into the picture, even more so. So it all leads us that we need support, we need help, and we're constantly asking for help. That's why we daven, and that's why we do Torah mitzvahs. I mean, Hashem wants us to do it, but it's also part of the tools that we have, our arsenal to help us fight the battles of the Yetzer Hara, the battles of this corrupt and hostile and difficult world. And as I said, everybody just has to look into their own lives, their own life experiences, and you see constantly there are always challenges. And even on the basic level, the Alter Rebbe makes it clear: nefesh alikis, nefesh abamis. No one is immune from the battle between those two. So even though, yes, we're close to the Geula and things are a lot easier today, physically at least, but there's still always challenges. And there's, again, just have to look in your own heart and soul. You don't have to look very far. And then when I've been getting into the challenges of pain and suffering and loss and different traumas, etc., but all of it adds up to a situation that, as powerful as the neshama may be, by root, meaning coming all from the highest levels, because it's subject to these concealments, so we're given all the resources we need. Like the Alter Rebbe says in the beginning of Tanya, Mashbin Eisei Tzadik Valti Rosha. Mashbin isn't just an oath, a vow. It also is a empowerment. Mashbin from the word v'savata, mazbia. So we're fed, we're nurtured, we're given many, many resources, generally Torah and mitzvahs, but we also are given teachers and guides and rabbanim and mashpim. Eine ha'eda, each generation has its leaders. And in addition, what we've been talking about, the cosmic support system of the angels, the malachim, which is part of the holy Atzilus. And obviously that needs work to be contemplated on them, but they're all part of the support. So now bring it back to where we are. So in that context, when neshamas, especially in Golus, need angel malachim for the hashpah of Ava v'yira, like he began on page 1444. So once he's ready developing this, started speaking about matat, the role of matat, and the different stages of the malach that Hashem sends, specifically in Parsha Mishpatim, and Moshe Rabbeinu's reaction to it, Yeshua's reaction. As we've summed up, I'm not going to go over that again now, but basically different levels of the matat's role, as matat is in Atzilus, matat in Biyah, and finally matat in Yitzira, Anochi B'Teicha Geila, Yecheskel's vision of the Merkava. So in the process, we're now discussing these different, as I said, watershed, different events. So sum up what we learned, to sum up all the levels. So we have like this. Now we've also introduced the Ovis, the patriarchs. So we all know the patriarchs are before Matan Torah, and yet they were a Merkava. They're high level. Avraham Avinu was the first one that began bringing Elokus, revealing godliness in this world. So the Rebbe Rashab, and I'm going in order, chronological order, not the order the way he explained it here. So we have the Ovis, and he called the Ovis the level of the Aspaklaria HaMe'ira that radiates through Aspaklaria She'ena Me'ira. What that simply means, Aspaklaria Me'ira is the level of Moshe, who's the closest Navi, the Navi that saw God face to face with the least amount or no filters. I mean, you can't say no filters at all because he didn't see God's face directly, etc. But what he saw, like it says in the Chazal, the Rambam brings it that he was misnava bezeh. Doesn't mention that here, but the Teichen. Zeh means marabetz boy ve'emer zeh. Loshen noichach. He sees it. When you misnava bekoi, it means koi, like. It's like a likeness, like a reflection, or like you're told about it, which is the other Nevi'im. So Moshe. The Ovis is something in between, because it's Aspaklai HaMe'ira, which means a transparent glass or transparent view, through a non-transparent view. But it starts with the transparency, but it's going through a filter. Whereas all the other Nevi'im, as he said, is only Aspaklaria, She'ena Me'ira. Okay. Then comes Matan Torah, Yitzis Mitzrayim, he mentioned, Matan Torah, and of course that's the level of Moshe. And that level is, like I just said, is a gilui of Atzilus itself, Aspaklaria Me'ira, the Bechina Zoh Atzmei, the Shemesh itself, the sun itself. What about the people of that generation? So he says, the people, he says, Yeshlemer, Hasogis, well, he doesn't even say Yeshlemer. He just says, Masogis Neshamis Yisrael b'mei Moshe, u'bizman Bayis Rishon. So now Bayis Rishon is equated, first Beis HaMikdash to Matan Torah, and the people then was like the Madrega of the Oves, somewhat in between Moshe and the rest of the other Nevi'im. So that's that. Then we have Yeshua, the generation after Moshe. So Yeshua, when he was with Moshe as a student, like Matat in Atzilus, Nar, Lo Yomish Meteicha, that total bittul, that's one thing. But then Yeshua becomes the leader after Moshe's passing. So now that's a lower level, that now he doesn't need a Malach Matat. Moshe does not need a Malach. But the Malach Matat, as Matat is in Atzilus. And then finally comes the next level, which is Yecheskel, the Navi after the destruction of the first temple. The first temple is like Matan Torah. And like he said, that's higher than Yeshua. That's how he began the parenthesis. Imkein hoy bezman abayis hagili l'mayla, from your days of Yeshua. What he called the sixth level of Aliyas HaMalchus, Shavim b'keimosam, equal in stature with Zah, the sixth level, or what the words of the Bechaye are Tiferes Bateres, that Zah is radiated, Tiferes of Azah, the Pnimius, Panim B'Panim is radiating within Malchus. Just summing up what we learned. Shavim became Mosa. He brought from Teira Eir. But Matan Teira, that was the level of Matan Teira, and the same with his Man Habayis. Pashtus, he means the first Beis Hamikdash. Then he brought the next B'chaye, Panim B'Panim, Ayin B'Ayin, which is the Yichud of Yichud Elah, Yichud Tata. That the Ayin Lamato, where the Yesh is below, and the Ayin is an Ayin as not Ayin with the I. Ayin Bittel is one with Yichud Elah, Ayin B'Ayin. So that covers, that's the level, like he said, of Moshe Rabbeinu's Man Habayis, Bayis Rishon, Matan Teira. So we have it covered now. You go through the Ovis, you have Moshe, Matan Teira, Bayis Rishon is like that level. You have Yeshua, the people, the generation of Moshe, then the level of Yeshua, and then the level of Yecheskel, which is the beginning already of the Golus after this, the first destruction of the first temple. So those are the levels, yeah, and be good to it'd be valuable to write it down. So you actually can refer to it because you literally have a map of different levels of revelation. Like for example, you could ask, is Yeshua the same level as the people during Moshe Rabbeinu? You could argue yes, because Yeshua was one of those people. But on the other hand, Yeshua, when he becomes a leader, is the next generation. So you could argue that it's a somewhat of a level lower. It's not 100% clear exactly that, but something to discuss. And I should also add that he said that Bayis Rishon is a little higher even, the Arizal says, so Bayis Rishon seems to have a mile even on, doesn't say Matan Teira, but he does say ACC's Mitzrayim. So that too can be looked into further. As I said, it's not everything here always can use more explanation, but that's a summary of what where we're up to. So with that, ready to continue, unless someone asks a question, to the lower part of the end of the paragraph on page 1447. Okay. So the last thing was the Asagas Neshamis Yisrael b'mei Mesha b'zman Bayis Rishon hayu kamei madregas ha'ovis canal. So let's continue. The line begins hayu kamei madregas ha'ovis, page 1447. You could follow if you want the text. Follow the text at ayinbeis.com. And he now continues. Now he brings out Ramaz. Ramaz is a Moshe Zakuto, was another great student of the students of the Arizal, wrote a commentary on Zohar, quoted quite often in Chassidus. Ramaz Parsha Veschanon, Dafrei Samach Aleph Omer Aleph. So if you look back, we have a good 5-6 annotations here, 6 references that the Rebbe Rashab is bringing, because as I said, he's collecting here all the levels and all the different places that talk about it. I don't recall other Maimonim that do this quite like so extensively, even though it's very possible this is, part of this is from the Tzemach Tzedek. I haven't found the source for these particular lines. Earlier, before the parentheses, was from the Likutei Torah. So maybe I'll look around and find. But regardless, the Ramaz Parsha Veschanon, page Daf Reish Samach Aleph Omer Aleph, it's 261a, Kosav. That's what he writes. Panim b'panim. So remember, panim b'panim is face to face, which we learned earlier is without filter, because you're like literally looking, when you look to someone face to face, you're eye to eye, like he said earlier as well. So this is the Ramaz teaches. He slaps his panim, the Arich Radiating, the panim de Zah. So it's different than what we learned before. Before we learned is the panim of Tiferes of Zah in Ba'teres in Malchus. That was panim b'panim. Or a little later he said Ayin Ba'ayin, Yichud Elah and Yichud Tata, which sounded similar to that level. Now he's going higher. The panim, because remember, Zohar Ampin is a face. Zohar Ampin, literally Ampin is a panim, but it's a small face. Arich Ampin is a long face, which of course is referring to a much higher level of panim. So the Ramaz is teaching panim b'panim, the face of Arich Ampin to the face of Zah. So obviously it's higher than what we learned before. Avoponim elponim, says the Ramaz. There's another pasuk that says not ponim biponim, ponim elponim. Now in Hebrew, if you think about it, ponim biponim means face to face. Ponim biponim, or face in face, technically bi. Elponim would mean face to face, el. So the question is, what's the difference between the two? It's not semantics. So the Ramaz is explaining it this way. There are different explanations of Chassidus, but here's how he explains ponim elponim. Just wonder, he doesn't bring here, I'm trying to find, before he spoke about ponim beponim, by matan teir dibur Hashem imachem, then he spoke about ponim beponim, v'dibur Hashem al Moshe ponim beponim, and now there's ponim el ponim. I recall, I have to look up where the psukim differ. It could be the end of Parsha Bracha, where it says that he was the only Navi that God spoke face to face, and maybe there, I don't want to speak from memory, so I'm not sure. But regardless, there's sometimes it says ponim el ponim. Says the Ramaz, what's the difference between that and ponim biponim? So ponim biponim, he said, is the face of Arich revealed into the face of Zah. Ponim el ponim, avol ponim el ponim, diksiv gabe Moshe. In other words, ponim biponim is what it says by Matan Torah, by the Yidden. Remember, there's a distinction between Moshe and his generation. When it says by Moshe, ponim el ponim, hu gili ponim de arich ampin atzme. So it's not even coming down into Zah, which is already somewhat of a lower level. But Moshe, ponim el ponim, means that he's seeing his face, Moshe's face is seeing the face of arich ampin without the mamutza, or the filter, if you wish, of Zah. That's how the Ramaz explains the two. So ponim el ponim is higher than ponim beponim. So this comes to support, even though we stopped in between, this is actually a follow-up to what it says a line before, that Moshe saw spaklaria me'ira. That means he saw directly, like through a transparent glass. The Oves saw spaklaria me'ira through a spaklaria she'ena me'ira, transparent through non-transparent. And he said, the Shamas Yisrael, B'yimei Meisha, and the time of the first Beis HaMikdash was like the Ovis. So you see a distinction. According to the Ramaz, the distinction is clear. Moshe is ponim of Arich Ampin directly, and the rest of the Yidden is ponim el ponim pip ponim, I should say, the Arich Ampin, the face of Arich Ampin into Zah, which is higher than what he said before, Zah into Malchus. And that's fine. They're in different places, you explain different levels. We learned about Kutche Bricha V'Shchinta. There's no real contradictions. It's just a matter of different ways of explaining it. Okay. So there we have that distinction. The Kol Zeh, says the Rebbe Rashab, Hu Hagili Aidei Slapshus B'Madregas Atzilus. Kol Zeh, everything we just learned, no matter what level it is all through a slapshus. You're not getting the etzem itself. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, relatively speaking, he's higher than everyone else, but it's still a slapshus. Even Arich Ampin is a slapshus if you think about it. It's a level called Arich Ampin. It's a very high level. So all this is a slapshus b'madregas atzilus she'ein zeh b'chinas helam klal. So on one hand it's a slapshus, but there's no helam. We're not talking about helam because atzilus is elikus. Even malchus of atzilus, like we said, when it elevates equal stature to Zah, is still elikus. So like we learned before about matat, even though matat indeed is not a Kadosh Baruch Hu atzma, it's not God himself, but his level is complete bittul. Not like the other malachim, the lower level malachim and this Ayin Sarim, the 70 ministers, where they don't have that complete bittul like we learned. So all this is slapshus madregas atzilus, she'en b'chinas zeh b'chinas helam klal, as he said earlier. So all this still the parentheses, by the way. So all long parentheses that began almost 10 lines from the top of the page, approximately. Ukiyadua, and as it's known, she'yislapshus b'madregas delikus, that even though it's a slapshus, which means one level of godliness is so-called enclosed and manifesting in another level of godliness, let's say Havaya into Elikim, or Zah into Malchus, or Arich into Zah. So how is that different, for example, than Atzilus and Tebriya? It's majorly different. Because when it says slapshus in Elikus itself, Ein ze mailam ala madrega hamislabeshes, that does not conceal on the level that is being enclosed. In other words, divine garments are different than the garments of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. So just to explain, if you put on garments, for example, we're learning now in the Parsha about the garments of the Kohuna, Big Day Kohuna, the Kovadil Teferes. These garments were holy garments. They're specifically spelled out by Hashem, the linen garments, the garments of other materials, and so on. So can you compare that, for example, to garments we wear just in a mundane day when the Kohen, for example, is not serving, he doesn't wear those garments. Or when someone's not a Kohen. Or put it this way, when you put on Big Day Shabbos, you dress certain garments. They're not the same as clothing of the weekday. And halachically, it's supposed to be different garments. Why? It's only a garment. Who cares what jacket you're wearing or what shirt you're wearing? Because garments manifest and reflect the level that you're at. Shabbos is a Shabbos Kodesh, so you wear special garments. It's one of the ways we honor Shabbos. We change our garments. Even those, like the Rebbe, for example, wore the same garments, physically looked the same, kapota, long coat, and a white shirt. But the Rebbe changed. Shabbos, he had a different kapota and a different white shirt. So there's even someone who wears all week long, like it says, a Talmid Chacham Ikra Shabbos. So even when he's called, even if in the weekdays, he's still relative to others a level of Shabbos. But by him, Shabbos is even higher. Just like Yom Kippur, we wear kittel, for example. So these outer garments are not just superficial. They mean that in garments itself, there are garments more conducive and more, you can call it, aligned with whatever dresses in that garment. So the same thing here. The levushim in Atzilus, what he's calling Islapshus and Atzilus, is different than levushim in Bria. Like the difference between a levush of Shabbos and a levush of weekday. Because in a lakus, Islapshus, he said, is not mylin. It is mislabish. It's still a garment. We're not saying that Arich is not going into Zoh and Zoh is not going into Malchus. It is. But it's all, you can basically say it's light dressing up in light. So it's Eris and Kalim, or Levushim, but the Levushim themselves are, you can call radiant Levushim if you wish. And even when there's a Slapshus, what is known is that the Mahus, the personality of the higher level, extends and radiates even when it goes into a Slapshus, into a lower level, in Elikus, in Atzilus. Something we learned earlier. So he speaks there, what's the difference between halacha and Ava V'yira even? So he explains, since halacha manifests God's will, halacha is a Torah law. He says, Shezeu Mahus Chachmei law, since it's a Mahus of Chachmei law, because the halacha is not human wisdom, it's God's wisdom. God is telling us what he wants us to do, whether it's tefillin, the halachas of tefillin, the halachas of mezuzah, the halachas of tzitzis, Shabbos, whatever it may be. So he says, "Hamislab is be'ed neshama the malchus de bria." So the halacha does manifest in a physical item, because tefillin is a gashmizdik thing. So the chachmei law of Hashem, he explains there, is mislabish in the light of the neshama, the energy of the neshama in malchus of bria. The question is, what effect does Malchus Abriya have on the Chachmei Law of Atzilus in Halacha? So Chachmei Law of Atzilus, it comes down into creation of the world. Let's say the wisdom of the design of animal species, or for that matter, mineral or vegetable or whatever. There, the Chachmei Befedish becomes concealed. There's wisdom there, but you can't compare it to the wisdom in Torah and Halacha. And he explains there that it's like similar to what he said here. Though it's a slapshus, but it's a slapshus that still manifests and is transparent enough to express the Gili of Elikus. That's why it's halacha. That's why the wisdom of Torah is not like the wisdom of science, even though they both come from Hashem's wisdom. It's a difference of how many levushim and how effect the levush has So both of them are talking about things, the matters of this world. But science will tell you perhaps what the cloth, the animal hide, is made of. Its chemistry, its biology. And Torah will tell you how to use it to draw down God's elokus and of God's rotzen and chokhmah into transforming the world. Science doesn't tell you how to transform the world to align it to God. It tells you how to manipulate or how to use it for human needs, and no one's taking away from that. But that's a very different type of islapsus than a islapsus of actually chokhmah of elokus, which is taking the gashmias and turning it into a keli for and aligning it to God's plan, so to speak. So therefore, he compares that. So therefore, you see, even though it is a slapshus, but these slapshus on these higher levels is one that does not conceal, and the elokus radiates through it. It does come down a level. That's clear. That's what's called a slapshus, but it still retains its divine properties, if you wish. The kolshkein be slapshus the esses spheres the Atzilus atzman. The Alter Rebbe says that even Chachmei Law, as it goes into Bria, and how much more so the slapshus of the 10 spheres of Atzilus themselves, the Arich Radiating, because we're talking about that Zah is receiving the face of Zah, is receiving the light or energy of Arich Radiating, or Moshe Rabbeinu is receiving directly. So that for sure, if halacha retains the godliness in it, for sure these levels. Oi, the other options, because we learned panim b'panim is another manifestation, be slapshus the b'chinas hamalchus. Kamoi shehi b'chinas shavim b'keimosam imazah. So the Rebbe Rashab is literally just telling us, I'm summing up what I said before, whether it's a slapshus of Arich Radiating into Zah, or not into Zah, straight to Moshe, or is a slapshus of Zah into Malchus, to the point that Malchus elevates the 6th level, that it's an equal stature with Zah, like we learned. So however you interpret it, all that is still in Atzilus, and therefore it's a level of Elokus. In Elokus itself, it's gone down levels, but it's not yet assumed any aspect of Yesh. There's no way to talk about something that has its own independent identity. Because everything in Atzilus, even Malchus, is still Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad. It's one with the divine, it's one with Elokus. And with this, he concludes the parentheses, the long parentheses that began talking about Yeshua in contrast to Bayis Rishon. And now he goes back, which he said Bayis Rishon was like Matan Torah, higher than Yeshua. So now we continue after the parentheses. Let me just read. I'll stop at the end of the paragraph for any questions. Well, l'chein ksiv. So the l'chein you have to actually read. I mean, it follows the parentheses, but technically, it's going back to the words all the way on top where it speaks, where he says that by Matan Torah was panim b'panim, bli shum emtsois v'slapshus klal. And now we understand that a lot better. Without any intermediary, any slapshus, by Matan Torah. In the parentheses, he explained there was his slapshus, but his slapshus that did not conceal. Well, l'chein ksiv, and that's why by Matan Torah it says, v'chol ha'am royim es hakelis, that the whole nation, not just Moshe, because like we said, the whole nation is like on a higher level, like the Ovis he compared it to, who saw the sounds. And Chazal tell us, Royin es hanishma, they saw the sound, or they saw what was heard, V'shemin es hanira, and they heard what was seen. So it wasn't just a revelation, it was an actual synesthesia, as they call it, a crossing of the wires, where they saw. Usually you see sights, you don't see sounds. And here they were able to see what was heard, and they heard what was seen. What is that trying to say? It's a gili that's higher than Islapshus. Actually, he says now not lack of Islapshus, lack of Ischalkus. That's telling you that this distinction between sight and sound was transcended, was eliminated for that period of time. That the Gila Elikus was without the regular structure and Ribei HaMadreges, a multitude of levels where the Zriya belongs in the eye. You see what you see. Shmiya in the air, you hear what you hear. To see the sounds and to hear the sights, that tells you that it's reaching a level higher than the structure. They went back, so to speak, to the, if you wish, the engine room. They only saw the general flow of divine energy. Divine energy and the flow of divine, you can say, energy or chayis, vitality. And there's no distinction, no separation, God forbid, between the Yishmi. Why does it say God forbid? Because on that level, it's Hashem Echad. They experience a level of seamless unity at that moment, or that period of time in Matan Torah. So this tells you how the level of Matan Torah, how high a level it was. So for Moshe, it was obviously even higher. But for the Yidden, it was like Ponim, I said, Ponim El Ponim, Gili of Ponim of Arich, according to the Ramaz and to the Ponim of Zah, or what he said earlier, Ayin Ba'ayin, Zah and Malchus, however you explain it, however, it doesn't have the concealments that come later. And he's going to talk about that, what happens after Matan Torah. And now keep in mind, after Matan Torah was Chet Ego. So that didn't help, of course. That created more concealment. So that level of Gili now has to go through a Malach, as we're going to learn more. We learn and we will learn. So this sums up, this is the end of the paragraph. As I said, there's more to go. He's still going to talk about Atzilus and the lower levels, and we're going to still have to go back to Golus, of course, and the Malachim. But it's pretty, I'd say, relatively speaking, for Ayin Beis especially, I think it's a pretty thorough, needs explanation, everything needs explanation, but it's a pretty thorough picture that he's painting here. But let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything. Okay. So let's continue. We move right along. But Inyan Hu, Rabbi Rashab, in his relentless fashion, never lets go. So we buckle our seatbelts, fasten our seatbelts, and we continue flying here. Va'inyan hu, and here's the inyan in this. Va'inyan hu shahoya gilui b'chinas atzilus mamish. Why was it like that by Matan Torah? Because by Matan Torah you have mamish the gilui of atzilus. Very high revelation, of course. Mamish, he says. Shezehu Matan Torah. That is Matan Torah. She'gilui atzilus mamish lamato. That atzilus was revealed below. Not as it travels through Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, obviously. That's what it means, Atzilus Mamish. Ukamesh Shekosov, like the Pasuk says. The Pasuk says it explicitly. Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. The God descended on Mount Sinai. Now, what does that mean? Where was he before? That now he descended. And then where did he go? I mean, Malay Kol Aretz Kvede. God is everywhere all the time. So you have to say it has some significance. So obviously, it's not a physical descent, because God was also on earth and is always here. You have to say in Revelation, the Gili of so-called Atzilus now manifested itself without filters on Har Sinai in a physical sense. And then the Aser Sadibris and the Reines Hanishma, Shemin Asanira that we just learned. The Hainu Gili Er Atzilus. That's what the pasuk means. I remember first time I ever learned this pasuk, I was a kid, a little child, and I asked right away the teacher, I said, where was Hashem before? And where did he go? I don't even remember what the teacher said. I think he said something like, you'll get older, you'll understand. This is what was the common answer. The Rebbe was amused by that answer because he himself also received that answer. And I remember the Rebbe once saying, that I remember what it was about. I think botnim, maybe, not botnim. Atzei gefer, atzei shitim. So the teacher translated a certain way. And the Rebbe asked the teacher, his own teacher, Malamed, what does that mean? And he repeated, atzei shitim, pinsenholz. Or atzei gefer, I don't remember now which, or tenenholz. The Rebbe said, what's tenenholz? So he said, atzei shitim. So, a circular... And then the Rebbe said, then I grew up. He told me I'll get older, I'll understand. I grew up and I realized that he didn't understand. So I did come to understand something. So bottom line is, I remember I asked the teacher, because I simply wanted to know what does it mean? Where's God going and where's he coming? But you start learning Chassidus, you obviously Erdano. We learned about the Maimer Paschalio Erdano. God is going down to see the pain of Zdoim, the pain being caused by Zdoim. So Chassidus explains, you read this from Das Elyon to Das Tachten, that he's engaging with it, not just a bird's eye view, but engage. And that's a whole bit. Akponim v'yered Hashem l'Har Sinai is gili eir Atzilus mamsh. V'zeho yegam ken hagili de Beis Hamikdash, like we said before. And the Beis Hamikdash, before he said Bayis Rishon, so I'm assuming it's still Bayis Rishon. Bayis Sheni is somewhat of a lower level. But I don't know if he'll discuss it. We'll see. But Kapon, the Beis Hamikdash was also such a gili. Because remember, the Beis Hamikdash was physically building a Beis Hamikdash, Shachanti b'Seicham, and God desires. So that's similar, like he said, to the level of Matan Torah. Shezeh inyan. Where do we see that? Where we say Tzimtzum Shchinte Beishnei Badei. God channeled the Shechina where? In a confined place. In the Beis Hamikdash, specifically in the Holy of Holies, and more specifically between the two rods of the Aron. So that's what it says in the Torah, that Hashem spoke to Moshe from the Pareches, from the Kapiris rather, from the cover, which was between the two rods, which they carried the ark, the Holy Ark. So there's an expression, Simsam Shchinta Mishnei Ba'adon, we learned it earlier as well. We spoke about how God can, like the divine image can reflect in a small drop of water or an entire ocean. So the Shem Shchinte B'Shnei Ba'adon, Shezeu Hamshachas B'chinas Pnimis Ha'er. It's a Chiddush, because Elikus is everywhere. The Shechina rests in other parts of the Beis Hamikdash. But the Aron, the Holy of Holies, what made it so unique? Because it was the Gili of the Pnimis Ha'er, what he's calling here Atzilus. And that's similar to the level of Matan Torah. So he's now, this Inyan, Ha'inyanhu, that he started explaining here, is explaining what level of Gili it is. Atzilus Mamish. To the point, so that's what he says. Ayin Mashakosov, Rabbi Rashab sends us to look, interestingly, B'dibra Maskul, V'Hashem Helech Lefneim Reish Ayin Ches. So we know this is one of the indicators that the Rebbe Rashab was still writing Hemshech Ayin Beis in Tov Reish Ayin Ches. So Ayin Beis began in 1912, Shavuos. Tov Reish Ayin Ches is 1918. We know the end of volume 2 ends in 1915. At the end of 1915, when he left Lubavitch, the last maimer is Vayera Tov Reish Ayin Vov. That's still the end of 1915. It's already Tov Reish Ayin Vov, but the new year began. But it was not yet the English, not the secular New Year. So it was Tov 19 and then 1915. Volume 3 has no dates because there's no Maimarim. It's just he wrote it. So he never delivered it. But these indicators tell us that with what year he was writing. That means if he said this, that means this has to be after that. So we know that it went at least to some time in Tov Reish Ayin Ches. Remember, the Rebbe Rashab passes away in Tov Reish Pei, 1920. So this is 1918. My thinking is that he may have gone all the way, we don't know till when exactly, because the last notes, the last annotations that he has is to Tov Reish Ayin Ches. We don't have anything to Tov Reish Ayin Tes. That doesn't mean he didn't write it then. It just means he doesn't cite anything from the next year, 1919. Just pointing out part of the whole research here of figuring out when the Rebbe Rashab wrote this and so on. So now there were other Maimarim coming. There's a whole Sefer Maimarim, Tov Reish Ayin Ches, mind you. So he was saying Maimarim regularly, even while he was writing this and not delivering it. Just a little, some what shall we say, some parparois, some background information on. So that's what we know from this Reish Ayin Ches. Okay. Now, so why do they reach the level where they saw the sounds and they heard the sights, which is more than just Atzilus? It sounds a level that's higher than total unity. Atzilus, we know there's a difference between Chochmah and Bina, and Chesed and Gvura, and so on. So he says about Atzilus, lo yesh his chalkus madregas. We'll explain what this means. In Atzilus, even though there are spheres, as he's going to explain, but they are under the aura and the sense, their consciousness is all about godliness. Like we spoke about the Ovis. The Ovis haya hein hein hamarkava. So the Ovis lived. Avram Avinu was not Yitzchak, and Yitzchak was not Yaakov. And then Avram had many differences in his life. He had a head and a body and legs and the different stages of his life story. And yet, it says in Tanya, Merkava 24/7, he was a chariot, a vehicle for God's presence in this world. So yes, he had levels, but what manifested, what was his consciousness, was all godliness. So if it was stretching out his hand to give charity to someone, or he was using his mind to contemplate in Hashem, what he felt was one God. However, it manifests in many levels. That's a description of Atzilus. So lo yesh chalkus madregas. He's not saying they're not esespheres, but they're no esespheres with so-called independent consciousness. Chachma doesn't feel it's chachma; it feels it's God's chachma. Bina, it's not just understanding; it's God's understanding. And the same thing, chesed, das, and chesed, and gvura, teferes. That means a level of full, complete elikus. It is a structure, because like higher than Atzilus, you don't have these levels altogether at some point. Hagam sheyesh, and here is as I said, next page. Sheyesh shamesh spheres, next page, 1448. Even though in Atzilus there are 10 spheres, that we know that. Umavur bekame duchtin, and it's explained in the number of discourses. Shebatzilus heim bebchinas is chalchos. And we learn specifically that Atzilus is not like Akudim, for example. Akudim is 10 energies in one container, like the one cell upon conception. There's no ischalkus there. It's one cell. Within it is concentrated the entire child that will develop. But there's no indicator. There's no ischalkus yet. It needs 9 months of development. In Atzilus, we say there is ischalkus. So what do you mean that you just said there's no ischalkus? And the Zewa Hefresh ben Lamaylam Atzilus, he continues to explore this. That's the difference between higher than Atzilus and Atzilus. The Lamaylam Atzilus are called Ubchinas Agdos Mamish. Higher than Atzilus, everything is completely seamlessly united. There's no distinctions at all. And in Atzilus, you have a structure of 10 spheres. And that's why, indeed, it's different than Tohu, where the 10 spheres are chaotic and unbalanced. And that's why the containers shatter. In Atzilus, the whole point is 10 spheres that work together. Hiskalulus. So yes, they are united. So what do you mean when you said before that Matan Teda is Atzilus and Atzilus is higher than Hiskalkus? I mean, he didn't say it as Mamash, he said it Hagam. So what does that mean? We'll continue reading. And Atzilus, there's energies, energy of Chachma into the Keli of Chachma. Same thing, the whole structure, Eres Bekelim. So here's the answer. Hine ein zeh, however, hine, now, ein zeh shein bebchinas is chalkus mamish. Even when we say there's a structure and there's a distinction, it's not mamish is chalkus. Remember, the word mamish is a key word because we're talking about ruchnis dika level, so everything is very subtle. So is chalkus mamish. It's not chalkus mamish, but madreges nivdoles v'nifrodes zemezeh. In levels that are separate, that are nivdolis would be different, and nifrad is separate from one another. Now he's going to explain what that means. So Atzilus, there is structure, but you can't call it a chalkus mamish as you would in Biyah, in Bria, Yitzir Asiya. So he's going to explain what that is, but let me stop here if anybody wants to ask him. He's going to explain what is the Achdus of Atzilus. And that'll take us back to the base, to Matan Teda and the Beis Hamikdash, where you had this Gili of Atzilus Mamish. And then we'll learn how Atzilus manifests through Mimutzayim, Matat, and then the lower levels, all the way back to Yecheskel in the time of the Golas after Bayis Rishon. This now we're talking about is Matan Teda and Beis Hamikdash. But he's going to explain more about this very level of Atzilus Mamish, which is really a very critical piece because it gives us a good sense of level of Gilui to be able to understand. Remember, the neshama comes down into Asiyah, to this lowest of worlds. That's why it needs the support of malachim and so on, especially in Golus. Here we're talking about a level of Matan Torah and Beis Hamikdash that is higher than the Hislopshus in the lower levels, as we'll learn and discuss. So let me stop here and take questions. Remember, the explanation of Atzilus will come afterwards. He's going to give a few examples. I see it's a nice, good piece. Goes all the way down. Another, I would say, 3/4 of the page or 2/3 of the page before he starts going back to Matan Torah, and then he's going to go back to Golus. So we're moving along. And I have to say, relatively speaking, it's not as dense as some other pieces. A little more development here. Of course, that's always helpful. Floor is yours. Anybody wants to ask anything? Okay.
I have a question. No one else is going to ask anything. It's a little unclear to me. We started out this discussion trying with the angel Matat and understanding how Matat helps mediate the flow of Elikus, and most classically between Malchus of Atzilus and Biah, like the potter's wheel. It's sort of but we got into these higher levels, talking about different periods in Jewish history where there was a greater revelation, greater or lesser revelation, depending on what's going on. And what's unclear to me, my question is, what is the role of Matat above Malchus of Atzilus? It would seem as though there's not a need for a Malach, because the flow is happening, sort of automatically, if you will. But
okay,
that's
so
not.
What's wrong with
That's
that?
not. There's nothing wrong with it.
That's exactly the point. That is the point.
Okay, just want
to.
to.
That's why Moshe didn't want to have a malach.
Okay. Yeah, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding it clearly.
Yeah. That's exactly the whole reason he's explaining this, is to contrast it. Why in Golus we do need the support of Matat.
I see.
Because we don't have this direct. If we had the Gilead of Matan Torah, we wouldn't need Matat. Basically. Like he said, because of Chet Egel, that's why Hashem says, Hini Shelach, Hini Anechi Shelach, I'm sending a malach before you to help you get through the challenges, to conquer Yisrael, and so on. If you go back, he says that explicitly on page 1445. Through, at least he's sending a so-called an ambassador or a minister of his, which is Matat. So it's correct what you're saying. The question you could ask is, La'asid Lave, after everything's said and done, and we finish, and we can get and we have the Gilead Likus of the highest levels, what happens to all the Malachim? Do they just disappear? Besides, of course, being rewarded for the work they helped us with. That's a good question. It's a legitimate question. I will address it, but I want to address that after he finishes the whole topic. Because it's like asking what's going to happen with Seder Shtalshalos in a way. Once the neshama does reconnect to Atzmus, so you could say, what do we need to say to Shal? What do we need a Tzimtzum for? What do we need a Kav? What do we need Eris and Kalim? What do we need Atzilus, Bria? So you could imagine that it means that all of that will be part of the Achdus with Hashem, because it's also part of God's. The support system is not going to disappear. We may not need it to elevate, but it's still going to be there and be part of the whole process of integration. It's like, will we have a digestive system when and we don't eat or drink anymore? So you could say, yes, we'll have a digestive system. Its function won't be to digest food. It'll be to channel godliness into different levels. So we'll talk about that more when we finish the topic. The Rebbe Rashab, I don't think, answers the question I just asked. What happens, L'aseh Lave, and so on. And yes, you could also ask, were the angels involved by Matan Torah? We know that the Malachim were involved to some extent. Besides complaining,
don't really know if we have a digestive system.
Besides complaining that Hashem shouldn't give the Torah to Moshe and to the people, give it to us. We know that they're involved, and the Eibishter came with his Hamal Yishaleh, with his entourage. But I want to reserve that. Once we finish this topic, we can go back and understand what's the purpose of all Ishtalshalus, of course, the Malachim as well. In other words, will we say Birchis Yetzer when Mashiach comes? Will we say Shema? Will we need to say the introduction about the Malachim before it? Halachic question you could ask. So let's reserve that. I will address it later.
How can you assume that we'll have a digestive system? It's so murky and so many miracles.
Because God created the digestive system.
Yeah, but why would he could also take it away if it's not necessary? I mean, I don't understand how we jump to that.
But what do you think he created because he needed it? You think he couldn't figure out a way for us to ingest food without the digestive system?
Sure, he could, but we stopped ingesting food. I don't know.
You think he had to create it? He could have found a way that, like an amoeba, you can just breathe air and
I have no problem with what you're saying.
So in other words, when we say the human beings created the divine image, that includes the digestive system. It's not just to digest food. It's part of God's structure of Seder Shtalshalus. Did he need Chachma and Bina to create existence? So you could say, once you connect to Atzilus, what do you need Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes? What do you need Eris and Kalim? What do you need at Tzimtzum and Kav? I just asked this question. My answer is that, yes, we will have them all because they're all part of God's system. And he wanted it for many reasons, not just the functionality of it. Like I talked about medicine a number of times. What will doctors do once there's no more illness and disease and death? They will reveal godliness, like the Rambam says, that we just finished the Rambam. They'll reveal the divine secrets within human anatomy and human biology and human chemistry. It's all part of God's design. This is all part of God's art. So why would we want to be deprived of that? Anyway, as I said, I'll elaborate a lot more when we finish the topic, but that's the ultimate point. Okay. So we'll stop here. So we're now before the explanation of how Atzilus works, and how do we explain that? Is it ischalkus? Is it not ischalkus? Is Atzilus made up of parts, structure? And if that's the case, what's the achdus? So we'll discuss that in the next class. So we're stopping 4 lines from the top of page 1448, and we will continue. Are there any other questions on this? Not? Okay, so let me stop